All right, we've got a great one for you here today. We are chatting with Greg Wasserman. He is head of relationships at Castmagic. And if you don't know what Castmagic is, you don't know what you are missing. A phenomenal platform that helps you to create all of the supporting materials around your podcast and, frankly, so much more. They can create amazing text-based content for nearly anything that you put out there with the power of AI. So excited to talk about and some of the features that they've unrolled recently and new ones to come. Greg, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it's always great talking to you. Thanks for having me on and giving me the opportunity to talk to your people.
Wow, it's great to have you. So you don't really come from a traditional podcast background, right? So like what kind of led you to the road of working with Castmagic?
What gave it away? My terrible setup? Yeah. No, my background is in media sales. I was in the media world for about 15 years. Last company I worked with was mobile apps company. So we acquired apps. Through the apps we acquired, we're in the podcasting space. So in the first day, your boss is to like, go figure out podcasting. It provides you a unique experience into the space. Before that, I actually sold podcast ads. So using my media background, I was at CBS before. Now it's Odyssey. So I sold podcast ads there. So that was ultimately my first introduction. Running 3 podcast listing platforms, it gives you a unique perspective, right? So I'm not a podcaster, but your job is ultimately, how do I help the podcaster? In this case, I have to go work with the hosting companies and go, hey, if your show's hosted on X, Y, and Z, we need to make sure that show ends up on our platform so our millions of listeners have access to that show. So it provided you a unique, like, let me learn all the hosting companies. And then from there, you start working with all the platforms, whether they're a network, individual show like yourself, or an agency, and going like, look, I have 2 million followers, too many errors. How do I help you? And you start realizing the 3 questions every podcaster asks is, how do I get more distribution? How do I get grow my audience, and how do I monetize? So those are 3 questions you also learn to hate from the perspective I had. But you really started learning what the podcast community is. And so my background is also partnerships. Partnerships and podcasting are very similar. They're all community driven. It's like, how do I help you, and can we work together? And my ethos is, hence my title, head of relationships. Life is about time and relationships. You have no clue where one conversation today is going to take you. And that's literally what podcasting is about. How do I come in, have a great conversation, and now allow that conversation to be heard by other people instead of just you and I having that conversation? So ended up at Castmagic. Long story there. Every Monday I post 3 podcasts I think people should listen to on my LinkedIn. I did the founders of Castmagic show before they even created Castmagic, and that ended up connecting us.
You know, it's so interesting that you talk about this aspect of community. I think so many people get into podcasting and the assumption is I'm behind the microphone, I'm talking to people, but you really find that the most successful podcasters out there are ones who really have a relationship with the audience. It's not just a one-way street. They really listen to their audience. They communicate with their audience. They allow them to engage with them on the show and the content and everything else. And really good ones build up these huge communities of followers and passionate fans. And frankly, they become the advocates that help people grow their show. So that's so interesting that, you know, you bring up this idea of community and relationships as an important part of what has made you successful.
I mean, I'll go on to that. Yes, I think podcasting creates you from a community standpoint, but the core focus of what I try to take about, and probably different for your audience, but like, stop calling yourself a podcaster and start treating yourself as a brand is kind of what I consult people on, because podcasting just becomes a download. Going back to the 3 questions I hated, like, how do I make money and how do I grow my audience? Well, everyone's thinking about, how do I grow downloads, or how do I make money with a CPM or a sponsorship just on my show? But there's so many ways that your content, your conversations, you can build community beyond that. So whether it's your blog, your social posts, a newsletter, your website, like, all those are different touch points that you can build a community and get feedback with. Like, I may not always listen to your show, but I can also get your newsletter, and I'm still giving you 3 minutes of my time, and so you're building that community function there. So I'm really focused on, how do we think about the content you're creating here, and how do you engage with the community, not just on downloads and listening to you, because maybe you're not going to.
And so funny enough, you mentioned the word newsletter, and that is a perfect transition to talk about the platform that we brought you here to talk about, which is Cast Magic, because there have been an explosion of platforms and solutions that take AI and tell podcasters that they're going to help them generate all sorts of supporting content for it. Cast Magic happens to be my favorite. One of the reasons for that is the entire the flexibility, right? The ability to not just say give me show notes and give me a transcript, but the ability to basically say here are things that I want, creating new prompts, looking at what other people have done, kind of, borrowing from other people's prompts, the community prompts idea. And so, like you said, you can use Cast Magic for your show notes, for your newsletters, for your social posts, for your transcriptions. You can use it for keywords, SEO. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And frankly, it's really only limited by your imagination. What are some of the best use cases that you've seen with Cast Magic recently?
Oh my God. I mean, look, our tagline is how do I turn any conversation into content like magic? I always look at content repurposing as twofold. All the examples you kind of gave, like turn in this podcast into a blog, a newsletter, a social post. But then also, how do I, to your question, turn that into a course? Like I've taken my coaching calls running through Cast Magic and created a course out of it, then monetize that course. Or how do I go ahead and take an aggregate of shows and going like, all right, I've got 5 tools. Let's take your show. I've got 5 tools that I've been brought on and talked about. Is there an article that we can go ahead and organize those 5 shows into something that would be like, here's a how to 25 step of creating your podcast based on the 5 episodes that have come on your show, right? So like you hit the nail on the head. You are only limited to your creativity. So Cast Magic, we give you all these existing prompts. We actually just released a bunch more today inside the platform. Community is driven, so I will come back to community. I know it's an overused word on the show right now, but also in general. But it is truly community driven. The feedback you provide us, that helps us. But that's why we also inject. And then if you want to come up with any prompts, go for it. So the nice thing is you and I could use the same prompt, but the input is going to be your recording versus my recording. So other ways I've seen it, I've gone to conferences and I've taken my phone and I've got the podcast. I've got the Cast Magic app on the phone, and I'm like, everyone's sitting there scribbling and writing notes. I'm like, no, I'm just going to hit record, have the keynote speak record, and then I automatically have my LinkedIn content of like, this is what I learned from whatever speech I went through, or how do I combine 3 of the panelists that I went and saw and create a LinkedIn post around that? Like, how do I write a book? There's so many ways that people are leveraging it. It's really, once again, creativity.
What would you say is the one mistake people are making with Cast Magic? Like, what are they doing or not doing to tap into the full potential of the platform?
I think it's an AI overall issue as opposed to just a Cast Magic, where you expect it to be perfect. You expect it to give you what you want. A great example is there was a person in our community yesterday, and they were struggling with a prompt. And like, this isn't giving me what I want. My words or my tonality, maybe, but that's how I read it. And then I looked at the prompt, and I'm like, I don't even understand what you're asking, right? So AI is only going to be as good as the direction you're giving it. And so if the direction you're giving it makes sense to you, but someone else reading it doesn't understand it, then you're not going to get the answer you want. And I think that's a big thing, not just with Cast Magic, but just as a whole, is people are like, why doesn't it know what I'm saying? AI should know how to read my mind and all these things. But like, at the end of the day, like, no, it doesn't. So this, I think, AI will actually make us better communicators. I know there's disagreements on the other side, but like, I think AI will make us better communicators because you will now be forced to actually say in a way that makes sense to another person what you want without them having to read your mind. And I always have analogies I use on this, but I'll spare the audience the analogies. Hopefully, you get the idea.
Yeah, I mean, what I always found amazing about this platform, and maybe others have caught up to it, but I love the idea of yes, you gave us some standard prompts that are useful for podcasters, but then we can go in there afterwards and say, yes, but I want it to be more like this, or I really want to include this feature in my show notes. And so to that point, the nice thing is that anybody who's using Castmagic, maybe you don't get the results you want the first time, but you can very easily go in, edit the prompt or add another one, kind of tweak and manipulate it a little bit until you zero in on exactly what it is you're looking for, and for AI to deliver that. And then after that, all of your future content just comes out right exactly the way you want it, not the way the platform has dictated it for you.
Yeah, and it's also editable. So the other thing is like it's not what I want. It's like great, you can go in there and edit what you want. So as you said, edit the prompt, but I can also edit the text and go great. It got me 80% of the way there. How do I edit it so that it sounds a little more? But like you have full control. But as we know, like podcasters, and this is why our platform takes any conversation. Podcasters like yourself do more than just podcasting. So how do we use your coaching calls? How do we use your sales calls? How do we use events and repurpose that? So like all these components you're able to repurpose, because a lot of that content is just sitting on a shelf. So how do I help you? Think, because most of your users, most people here are smarter than me in terms of understanding their business, going like, I wish I could do this. And now you've got a platform that could actually help you do what you've always said you want to do. You just didn't have the time, the resources, or whatever the case may be.
It's funny because yes, I've primarily used this for the podcast and for generating that kind of first round content, and then taking a look at it and making a couple of massaging efforts. But then, I'm doing other businesses, and I've been feeding in our social content, these little videos that we're making, and saying, give me some good captions, give me some good titles. And right, the prompts are dramatically different from what we're using for the podcast, but we're getting some really great things, and almost copying and pasting exactly what Castmagic spit out after creating the right direction for the AI to give us what we want from our content.
Perfect use case. There you go. Love it.
So, if you're allowed to say, what are some of the future features that are being worked on for Castmagic that users of the platform today can look forward to, or those on the fence about whether they should sign up for it or could look forward to?
Great question. So so we have a Slack community. That's where our community lives, 1,500 people or so. I just announced earlier this morning, so for you and I talking, but those that are listening, like new updates we had is we started adding more prompts in there. So the way it's set up is there's 8 different profiles: podcasts, YouTube, coach, sales, webinars. In each of those profiles, we've already given you a packet, if you want to think about, of content that out of the box you're going to get. And then there's community prompts, because everyone asks like, what prompts should I be doing? This is great, but I would love to do more. So we've included prompts from the community going like, hey, you may think this is something of interest. Getting a lot of people asking like, I need more than one LinkedIn post. So we just threw in 15 different options for LinkedIn posts. Once again, the joy is you and I could use those same LinkedIn posts, but the input, our content, is going to be different. Therefore, the output's going to be slightly different. So helping people understand, hey, you have full control over what prompts you come up with, but I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you some ideas and give you guidance there. We're working on getting a Zoom recorder, so you can actually then start having a companion there and have that fed directly into your Castmagic. You have the iPhone, so the iOS app, which is a great one. So you can now record your thoughts, your brain dumps, your meetings, whatever it is, while you're on the go. Those are great things that you can look at. And we'll just continue to evolve our studio function. So studio is our visual component to it. So we're not trying to be Canva. We know there's a lot of people out there doing all these components. We like to give you control and give you the options to do more visuals. So from a podcast standpoint, how do I start cutting those and making little clips? But also, how do I start creating, quote cards and audiograms and so forth?
Very neat. Well, if you haven't yet, check out Castmagic. It's castmagic.io. And as usual, we will have a link to it here in the show notes, so you can easily find it. You don't have to write that down or memorize it. Greg, before we let you go, we have a few questions that we like to ask everybody who comes on the show. One, and this is interesting because you have such a diverse background and have really come into the podcasting space from a different side of it than most of the other folks who we've spoken to. But is there a place in podcasting where you would like to see dramatic improvement on like a industry wide scale?
I guess I'm biased in the sense that like I come from the media background. So I think the what I saw in media was, and I'm gonna have to actually look this up, but there was a big holding company that came out years ago, and they're like, we aren't buying ads unless it is above the fold. We're not buying ads unless it's a 3 second viewability, and that changed the game. That made all the agencies, that made all of the tech companies, that made everyone go like, whoa, I'm not going to get any budget from these guys, which is a lot of money when they're one of the big companies. I've got to change my game. And I don't think that's happening in the podcast space because right now, Spotify just left the IAB. So, like, forget this. Apple hasn't figured out, and you saw a change in their downloads. So, I don't think there's anyone in the industry, and I'm sure like Sounds Profitable and Triton and Brian Barletta and the whole teams are talking about it, which I follow their stuff. But like, I truly think until we can come together as an industry and there's a collective, let's change this, or as we saw on the other side, a big advertiser is going to go like, I will start spending millions of dollars and billions of dollars in podcasting if you do this. No one's willing to do that. And so until then, it's just going to be very fragmented. So I think people will just continue to go like, I don't know what I'm buying. I don't know if it's working. And we will continue to try and figure those components out. But I truly believe podcasting, they go back to those three questions I hate. How do I make money? And if we look at it just as a sponsorships and a CPM and buying that, like if I'm only going with that as the way to make money, I think the industry will go far beyond the 2 billion that we're expected to a lot more because at the end of the day, it's influencers. Like influencer marketing is supposed to be like a $20 million or $20 billion industry. And podcasting, you've got basically you're an influencer. You are using a product, you are great, you have an audience, you have a community. So I think until the industry comes together, that will be a problem, which will allow me to continue to tell everyone, stop thinking about yourself as just a podcaster and focus on more than just downloads because the industry is still trying to figure all that out.
I'd be so curious to get your reaction to this. Like 7 years ago, I remember sitting at Podcast Movement with the heads of Libsyn and Blueberry and a few other companies and wondering, why didn't Google take over the audio space the way they did the video space? They really, that acquisition of YouTube made them the central focus of all video content. It was the platform where everyone had to go to upload their content, to monetize their content. They are so good at creating advertising opportunities and selling it and auctioning it and targeting it. And I never understood why they didn't do the same in the podcasting space. I really thought they would make the YouTube of podcasting years ago. And obviously they've had the exact opposite. They've done, little to nothing, and everything they have done has floundered considerably. Any thoughts on why Google isn't the like advertising platform, or why they haven't had a bigger focus in this space?
No, I mean, it's a great one. Like everyone, you brought up podcast movement. So those that are aware, like every year now, it's like video's the thing. And what is a podcast? Podcast has to be renamed because it's just not audio. And you got the purists who are like, no, it's an RSS feed, and that's what a podcast is. But like YouTube is the second largest search engine, and everyone's now saying like you got to put your podcast from a video standpoint there for reach and the search and so forth. But like, yeah, I honestly don't understand. Um, because the influencer space has been so large and everyone's so focused on influencers from a TikTok and Instagram standpoint. But like, let's go back to the core, like radio. And radio was the first influencers. We go back before TV, and then you got TV, and you think about how shows were sold then. Like, I always think of I Love Lucy, and it was integrated in, like all that stuff back then. Why hasn't it been found where you've got these niche audiences that you can aggregate just like you do with influencers on Instagram? We have not figured that piece out in the podcasting space. And I think that is a huge miss. And I don't understand why it's not happening. Like I'm dumbfounded as much as you are.
That might make for a good debate or roundtable discussion to have with a bunch of folks, including the Brian Barlettas of the world and the Tom Websters and the Rob Walshes and all those good folks. Outside of that, is there any tech? Obviously, we are podcasting tech. Is there any kind of technology out there, whether it's hardware or software, that you are just dying to get your hands on, whether it's something that exists that you want to buy or something that you hope someone will create that will make your life easier in this space?
I mean, I guess the answer to that one is I just got to first invest in a better setup, right? Like I watched your episode with someone, and I'm like I'm using my camera, and I'm looking down, like, so I know I need to just invest in doing a better setup with the limited space I have here. So I think that's first thing. I think it already exists. I just need to go ahead and buy it and invest and figure out how do I set that up. But that also goes to what probably you tell podcasters is like, look, hit record, just start doing it. You can upgrade your tech stack, you can update your products later. Like, you don't need it now in order to start. Just start, and then you'll upgrade. I think like you've done it. You're like, all right, I had one mic, and then I've got another mic, and you've upgraded from there. So I think for me, that's the first before I go and say like what isn't being built. Um, I think I think from a tech standpoint, go back from advertising. I'll go back to that. Like, why isn't there something there that makes it a better experience? Overall, I think it's exciting. I think podcasting, if you're in this space, it's exciting, even if you're tangential like myself. Like, I'm not a podcaster. Everyone keeps asking, when will I start my own show? Right now, I'm having fun being a guest and experiencing what that experience is like, which I think goes towards most hosts listen to a show and they're like, I'm going to start this. And they've never actually been either a guest or understood what other shows are good quality. So yeah, right now I think that's where my focus is, less on a tech or a software.
And you started to talk about other shows. So the last question is, what are some of your favorite podcasts you are listening to today? The ones that as soon as they hit your feed, you are going to listen to them. You're going to stop what you're doing and check those out. They will not get past you.
None. Yeah, I know that's a terrible answer.
Ooh.
I listen to so many podcasts every Monday. I recommend 3 podcasts that I post on my LinkedIn. And I try to focus on not the big ones, not on the ones that everyone knows, not on the ones that everyone's always listening to. I'm like, let me go find new ones. Like, let me go find, doesn't matter how many downloads, like, let me just go learn something. Because the core, the indies are always struggling. I think someone had said like they brought up like Wondery. It's like, well, at one point, those indies, they were indies before they blew up or they got investments. So like, I'm always looking for new shows. So there's nothing that hits my feed, and even if something does hit my feed, because I know I want to recommend other podcasts, I will probably skip the go-to shows and go figure out like what other shows are out there. Like, recommend me, let me know, let me listen, let me learn something. Maybe it's just one episode. I'm like, I like the guest, I didn't like the host. Who knows? But I'm always trying different things.
Love it. Well, if you want to see those recommendations, you can check out Greg's LinkedIn profile. We'll have a link to that in the show notes below, as well as, again, a link to Castmagic. It is a platform that just does an amazing job using AI to take your recordings, not just podcasts, but you could use, any video, any audio, open up the app that they have. It's a great app. Just record wherever you are in the world, and it will take that information for you and transform it into whatever it is you need for it to do. It's a great platform. I cannot recommend it enough. We use it here at Podcasting Tech. So, Greg Wasserman, head of relationships at Castmagic, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, everyone. Thank you for your time listening.